Hey everyone, welcome back to NC State Dendrology. I'm coming to you today from the Schenck Arboretum. If you haven't visited, you should definitely plan to come this semester. And this is a poor example of one of my favorite pines, Table Mountain Pine, Pinus pungens. And Table Mountain Pine, of course, is in the Pinaceae family. And this tree, there's actually a stand of trees here that are not super happy. You can see that they have a lot of dead branches, and this is a mountain species, right, native to central and southern Appalachians, and a fire-dependent species. So I'm going to talk a little bit about fire and its habitat, but first let's start with its identification. So Table Mountain Pine, or TMP as I like to call it, Pinus pungens, has needles in twos, and they are twisted. I tried to find some live branches close to the ground, but really, like, even the foliage that's near the ground is looking pretty unhappy and dead. So I got these needles off the ground, so they are in twos and they are twisted. You can see they are fairly short, right? Maybe the length of my middle finger. And compared to other pines, they're extremely stout and stiff, so this is a very stiff needled pine. 2 needles per fascicle. The form of this tree is really typical. So Table Mountain Pine has, if you're a forestry person, it has a kind of a crummy form. It's got a lot of branching. You can see where there's dead branches retained on the trunk. Those are all for a purpose, so stay tuned just a minute. And then the cones are really, really distinctive. So they're these big cones, right? This one is attached directly to the branch. And actually, if I pan up just a little, okay, you can see that there are cones attached directly to the trunk in some places, and that they're attached in these groups and clusters around the trunk. So similar to this, right? This one has fallen off and I found this on the ground. So these cones are clustered, right? So very large, kind of egg-shaped cones. They're a little bit wider at the base than that they are at the top. Here's one that's opened, right? And you can see that they have beautiful Fibonacci spiraling on them, and they are got a really stiff and strong and sharp prickles on the end. So these cones are, you might have noticed, are closed up. They are an example of Serotoninous cones. So let's talk a little bit about Table Mountain Pine and its fire adaptations. So this is a species that's found about 3,000 to 4,000 feet in the mountains, also in monadnocks. So it's found at Hanging Rock State Park and other Piedmont monadnocks around the state. So it tends to be on these high, dry, exposed, lightning-prone ridgelines, right? So think Linville Gorge on the edge, these really high rocky ridgelines. The gnarly pine is specially adapted to those, and so it doesn't have a straight, tall form, right? It's advantageous to be shorter in stature and kind of have this gnarly appearance, very thick, leathery foliage. So this is a fire-adapted species. And at one time, fire was a lot more common around the southern Appalachians. Lightning fires were not suppressed. And so this species thrives on catastrophic fire. So back to the tree form, it's short and gnarly. It retains branches, right? So these serve as a fire ladder. So this tree is designed to pull fire up into the canopy to have a crown fire, right? Which kills back the tree itself. But what it does do is it prepares the forest floor, the perfect conditions for pine seedlings to establish. And so, right, like most pines, Table Mountain Pine is not great at regenerating in its own shade. You will never walk into a pine stand and see seedlings on the forest floor. And so what happens is this catastrophic fire burns off the organic duff layer in the soil, opens up this mineral seed bed, clears the canopy, right? So these trees are all dead. Perfect conditions for seedlings to establish. So these Serotoninous cones are important because they stay sealed. They're actually sealed shut with resin. They will not open unless there is a fire to melt that resin and pull the cones open. Now over time, this cone has been sitting in my house, and so it's dry there, right? I have the heat on in the winter, and so this pine cone has opened and released its seeds. But these pines will retain cones along, years worth of cones along their branches, waiting for those specific special fire conditions to happen. And so because of fire suppression, because of human communities being located close to these ridges, people like building where there's a nice view, right? Over time, we have seen a loss of pine ridge communities. So these can have table mountain pine and pitch pine. And so these stands have declined. And in order to restore them, you have to reintroduce fire. That can be really difficult to do in the mountain terrain. There's a lot of risk to doing that. So there's a fire effects crew for the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. And after the fires in 2016, I had a chance to go with them to some of the parts of the Smokies that had been severely burned. Sure enough, there's a whole stand of completely torched table mountain pine, right? Cones still on the branches in some cases, but the cones being open, having released their seeds onto the forest floor, and the forest floor was covered with seedlings. So that is the kind of fire that's needed to restore this type of forest community. So again, this is table mountain pine, Pinus pungens, and like I said, it's probably my favorite pine found in the central and southern Appalachians with these truly wicked cones. And that's a wrap for NC State Dendrology. Thanks for tuning in.